Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are at an away game today up in the Napa Valley at the Yountville Vintage House Estate, which is a great hotel if you're ever up here. Kind enough to give us their conference room for our podcast today with Jess Lander, the wine reporter of the San Francisco Chronicle. Introductions in just a second. Wine Talks, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you hang out for your podcasting. And always sponsored by the Original Wine of the Month Club, now sporting the Napa and Sonoma series of wine. Have a listen to Brooke Martin coming up. She is one incredible woman, influencer out of the Salt Lake City area, which is totally bizarre for anybody to be in the wine business in Utah. But have a listen. That is coming out tomorrow, actually. Anyway, not why we're here today. Here to have a conversation with Jess Lander. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So fun to meet you and talk with you about what's going on in the wine business up here in Napa Valley, because I've been following you, reading your stuff, and intrigued by this. But you're not from here. You're like a Boston person.
Yeah, so, which people don't generally like.
No, we like. But what's fascinating when I read your resume was, you were like the Bo Sox. Really, were really kind of sort of your fascination, right?
Yeah, I was writing a lot about the Bo Sox, the Red Sox. It was a time when they were winning a lot of championships along with the Patriots and the Bruins.
Oh, yeah, well.
It was a good decade or so we had. But I had been working in women's professional soccer, actually, full-time.
Really?
For the Boston Breakers team that was there. And the league folded. I think they're back up with another name now. And I needed a job.
So, let's just stay in Boston for a second, because I had the honor of going to a Red Sox game, two of them actually. Of course, us West Coasters will say Bo Sox, but you can go Red Sox. Fascinating urban field. The energy around the field before the game, after the game, during the game, and we had just bought will call tickets. Who knows where they really were. And I made my way down to the third row, right behind the left-handed batter's box. And my daughter and I sit down, and this guy goes, "Hey, dude, those seats are taken." And I looked at my daughter. I said, "Oh, I guess we better get up." And he goes, man, he slaps me on the back, and he goes, "I'm just messing with you, dude. Sit down." And then he gives me a bag of peanuts.
That sounds about right.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's definitely an experience I recommend to anyone, whether you like the team or not. Just being at Fenway is an incredible
really
experience.
Different.
I tell people that if they can and it's not too hot of a day, to definitely sit in the bleachers.
Oh,
as
really?
They say, because
bleachers?
that's where the real character of Boston comes out. If you want the full experience,
like the Green Monster, that part of the bleachers.
No, that's like where the highbrow people sit.
Oh, okay,
more
right.
Just like across from center field in the sun, but it's the lower price tickets generally, and you just get a lot of
where the red
fun.
seat is the red. What's his name? Seat.
No, I
that far
can't
out?
remember. Yeah, it's like totally out there.
Okay,
in that
well,
field. But you get
time.
the good people watching and just entertainment on top of the game.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's really different. And the Buckmeister, which is they're tearing down now, I guess. The Buckmeister is right outside. It's a hotel right outside left field, and apparently where they hatched the White Sox or the Black Sox. The scheme actually was done in that hotel, which is kind of weird because we're in Boston, but
there's a lot of history there.
They're taking it down anyway. Well, that's not what we're talking about. But you made your way to wine in the Napa Valley, which seems like a radical transition.
Yeah, it was definitely random, but I had come out here because I needed a job, as I said previously, and was into sports writing. And the Napa Valley Register needed a sports reporter for their St. Helena and Calistoga high school sports.
Ooh.
And I had visited San Francisco, loved the Bay Area, and decided, all right, let's see what California's about.
Wow, so you were the St. Helena sports writer.
And Calistoga.
And that could have been voluminous content.
Oh, voluminous. I have half my section in the Star each week was taken up by adult bocce league scores.
Yeah, right. Look, Little League sign-up started this week, so you can write about that, I guess.
It was good small town newspaper coverage. It was fun.
Yeah,
but just naturally, it's hard to avoid the wine industry when you're here. I didn't really know much about wine when I got here.
How many years ago was that?
It's been 12 now.
Wow, that's that's embedded in the wine industry.
Yeah.
And what happened? That you just decided that you start hanging out at tasting rooms or something? Or
Yeah, my friends and I, back then there was a lot more affordable or free options for people, so we would take advantage whenever we could.
Yeah, that's true.
And then I eventually met my now husband, who is a winemaker, so that helped speed up the education a bit, I would say. And yeah, you just kind of fall into it and started writing a few wine pieces here or there, and it snowballed.
when you were writing, like just for fun, and this is, I'm a writer to the extent that I wrote this newsletter for 20 years almost, and I have to write these talking points, and writing is hard. I mean, writing takes focus. How do you deal with that?
People always tell me how hard writing is for them. It's honestly pretty
not that hard.
natural for me.
That's great. Thanks
Doesn't
a lot.
mean I don't put effort in. And yeah, I do have to focus. I think I'm one of the rare writers who, when I'm really writing something, I don't want like music or anything on in the background. Right. But it's definitely a natural thing for me, and I've been doing it. I knew I wanted to be a writer when I was like 9 years old. Yeah. So it's just always been something I've enjoyed.
I suppose if it's just what you know you want and like and are passionate about it, I like anything. But still, you know, what I have to do when I write, because I tend to take off in all kinds of directions, and my wife's like, you know, you're scatterbrained, you're everywhere. I'm like, okay, is rewrite it and refocus pick that passionate subject and then take that direction. Do you have problems with sort of moving around, or are you not like that at all?
I mean, I feel like I'm pretty focused. A lot of my talk content is driven by news and things that are happening in the industry. So it's pretty, it's there. I know what I'm writing about. But definitely certain stories can take a million directions, and it takes time to figure out what you can fit. We're not writing 2,000-word articles.
Yes, right. That's
so,
true.
What can we fit in? What's important? Probably, I think my longer features are around the 1,200 word range, but a lot of them are more like 700 or 800 words. Just depends.
You have to be pretty efficient with 700 or 800 words still. I mean,
yeah,
you can't waste a lot of
that's
space.
actually been probably the hardest thing for me is since being with the Chronicle is like really tightening and getting that word count down, because in my previous jobs there was a little more flexibility, and I could wax poetic for forever and fit in all the great quotes I got. And but you know what? That's not necessarily the best approach either. People want to write. They want all the important information. They don't necessarily have time or need.
That's what, I spent a lot of time like removing the word I from conversations. Try to do that even here on the show, because it's not what people are here for, right? They're here for the information and maybe be entertained and maybe. So is it a weekly column? Oh, is it monthly? What is it?
At the Chronicle?
Yeah.
No, I'm a full-time reporter, so we're writing off sometimes. I think my biggest week I had like 5 articles come out.
Wow. Usually
have probably average like 2 to 3 a week. Yeah, so we're just constantly, I work with Esther Mobley, the critic. We work pretty hand in hand.
Oh, yeah, right. Yes, yeah.
And we just cover all the news. If a vineyard or a winery sold, we cover, and if anyone unfortunately notable passes away, we write obituaries. We write news openings of new wineries, new wine country restaurants, and then cover all the important issues that we see.
The Chronicle is well respected for those articles.
Yeah, so it's one of the reasons I wanted to work with them is there's a lot of integrity there, and it's real serious journalism.
I always think, like, is there enough stuff to talk about? And I find myself sometimes bringing up the same subjects, but there are current subjects that people want to hear about.
Yeah, there's definitely a handful of topics that are very timely and relevant that we revisit over and over again from different angles, I would say. I
would love to go back and see what was like the hot conversation in 1975 before the Judgment of Paris, and then what was interesting, in the 80s and what was interesting in the 90s.
Yeah. And also like how much wine coverage was even happening back then.
Well, that's true too. It's totally different. And the direct-to-consumer market's totally different than it was during COVID and pre-COVID. Wineries are having the same issues, the conversations I'm having with winemakers and reps of the wineries. We are so in a crossroads of like, what is happening out there? And so one of the conversations, and I just read your article about Vincent Morrow at the press, which that in itself is a discussion with anybody that's come to the Valley on a regular basis that used to go to the press as a steakhouse. And now I guess it earned a Michelin star.
Yes, just got a Michelin star.
Yeah. So completely different experience,
Yeah.
right? And then Vincent Morrow, the Psalm there, you wrote a great article about his ascent and his award by was it the Cours Sommeliers?
No, it was actually a Michelin awarded him Sommelier of the Year for California. So
Oh, it was Michelin.
yeah, so which is they've recently in like I think just the last few years started giving out individual awards, kind of like a James Beard situation, and so I think it's pretty notable that he got that award. It was a Napa wine, sommelier,
Huge.
and he's one of the only 4 Black master somms in the world. So I think it's just a big deal.
It's interesting, particularly there, because the wine list is incredibly prolific.
But it's a Napa only wine list, so
Yeah.
that's still a pretty distinguishable
amazing,
to get
right.
that. And then also he's only been at press for 2 years, so he very quickly has made an impact.
And during, when the food was being transitioned, and I'm sure there were some angry customers and some happy customers and the whole thing.
Yeah, I would say I'm sure they have some people who've been going for decades that don't like change.
No.
But from my perspective, I visited press before. I was there at the start of this change, and I think it's fantastic.
Yeah,
and I
really
hear from a lot of locals that
it's much harder to get a table.
it's hard to get a table.
It
It's
was.
it's not cheap. It's pricey, but what Phil Tessier is doing there is pretty incredible. And I found myself going quite a lot more than I ever used to
Really?
the last 2 years. Even just, they have a great bar. So like local winemakers and industry people love.
So if I
just
say
going to
Jess
that
Lander
bar.
sent me, it's
Yeah, please
immediate
do.
table.
Yeah, maybe a table. I don't know
Actually,
what else.
the reason we started going there, which was years ago, is because I interviewed Josh Phelps down at the shop, and he mentioned in the conversation that that's his favorite place, and so I played it back the next time we came up. I go, we'll have to go to the press. So we started going at that point, and I've seen him there many times actually.
Yes, I saw him there recently as
Did
well. He definitely still frequents that spot.
And I I interviewed the winemaker at Rudd. I forgot her name, and Natalie Bath. So she sent us over there too that one time. So, well, I was trying to go this week, but I can't.
Well,
because I can't
you
get
were
her.
like 1 week too late.
Yeah, I can't get
now
yeah.
once they get that star, it's definitely gets more difficult.
You know, it's interesting. My daughter is a boulanger, and my friends that listen to this show are going to go, "You said it again," but I have to. She earned a star. She was the baker of record in New York at a place called Benno. Jonathan Benno worked at the laundry as well, and COVID hit a month later, and they didn't reopen. So how important do you think the Michelin star is? I mean, from your travels in the world of food and wine.
I think it depends on who you ask. I think it's similar to wine scores. I personally don't care very much about wine scores. It's not something we do at the Chronicle. I'm curious. I'm constantly asking winemakers if they still care about scores.
Yeah.
And a lot of the answers I get is that the people still care and they still see a lot of impact from getting those recognitions. So I think it's similar with Michelin. If you have that recognition, like you're going to get press, you're going to get business, and it's going to translate. But I think there's also a lot of really amazing restaurants out there that don't have stars because they're not hitting these categories
That's
that
true.
require you to be pretty high end generally. And, they might be more of a value. And so I think the majority of the population isn't going to Michelin restaurants. And,
That's
and that's
true.
why they have the Bib Gourmand awards now,
Yes.
which I think are maybe the more interesting ones for the general population.
When we travel, we use the Michelin Guide app, and so they have a bunch of recommended races. Our favorite restaurant in Paris is because of that. And I think there's value to it to the extent that at least it's not a whole bunch of yahoos who don't know anything about food or have any taste buds at all, giving them 5 stars on Yelp or something.
Yes.
When you have at least a consistent ranking.
Yes, and professionals that are doing
That
it.
understand the whole industry.
Yes.
You know how it started? This is my favorite trivia stuff.
I think I've heard it, but
It was Michelin, the tire company, didn't
Yeah.
want you dining in Paris. They wanted you to wear out your tires. So they went to the suburbs of Paris and started in 1929 or 1932 or something.
Genius.
Anyway,
I mean,
it's brilliant.
Yeah.
And now look at it.
I think a lot of people are surprised to find it is the tire company.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
They don't realize. Yeah.
So the wine scores thing, which is interesting, because there with the Michelin Guide, there's a stability to at least what you think the rankings are going to be, but the scores are totally different. You've got Suckling and Parker and Spectator and Enthusiast and who else? Jeb Dunnick. And I find that very fascinating, because I had a wine not too long ago that was this obscure grape called Listron Negro from an obscure place, the Canary Islands.
So
I blew me away. I was so fascinated by this wine. And let's just say it got 95 points. Let's say they ranked it. And somebody else, so a point buyer finds Napa Valley Cab, that's 95 points. But these wines are radically different wines. And so you're going to find that, yes, they both got the same score, but they're so different, and I don't like one of them, whether it's the other one or the other.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the best things, that there are so many more critics now. It's not just Parker like it was for a while. So you can really, as a consumer, find a critic or a website that fits your palate. You know, if you're willing to put in the work and do the research, you can say, do I consistently like the wines that James Suckling ranks high, or is it Jeb Dunnick or someone else? And, you know, then really follow that person, because it is overwhelming. Like, who do you listen to? And at the end of the day, it's just based on what you like and what do they like, because two critics might rank to the same wine very different as well.
Completely.
Yeah.
And that's what's fascinating to me. And I suppose it's a necessary consumer thing. But then you turn around and you see this stuff on the shelf, like Apothic Red and 19 Crimes, that has no rankings and nobody really cares, and it's flying off the shelf.
Yes.
So you think...
because that subset of consumer isn't looking at source. You know, I think it's pretty specific.
Do you think you're writing, that when you're writing for the Chronicle, do you look at or feel like, okay, my audience is this person? This is maybe the wine reading public, and who that person is?
Always. What is really unique about the Chronicle is we do not have the same audience as Spectator or Wine Enthusiast. You know, we are not a wine publication. We are a Bay Area news publication. And our audience for wine readers is actually very diverse. So I'm constantly thinking each story is probably going to hit one or two of those subsets more than the others. But we have, you know, a lot of the industry reads us because we do cover a lot of what's going on within the industry. We have consumers that may just be getting into wine and they're interested in, they drink it at home, but they're definitely, you know, not super knowledgeable or sophisticated or spending money on Napa Cab. And then we do have more serious people that live in the Bay Area that, you know, are curious about that higher end stuff, or more geeky articles. So I think we try to cover all those bases, but it's a little challenging. And also for me, it's more fun. I much prefer to communicate with this diverse range of consumers, but also especially the ones who are just getting into it and want to learn more.
Yeah, that's the key, I think. You know, it's what the show is for, and that's why I wanted you on the show, is to have that conversation, so people would, maybe there's something that piques their interest, a subject matter that we're talking about, that maybe it's the Psalm thing. When I got to go back to that, actually, we started on the diversity thing. We never got to the end of it. Maybe it's the fact we're talking about some wines that are in your local market. Maybe we're going to talk about 95-point wines. Whatever we talk about, that one of those subjects might pique an interest and have you peel it back. For me, in the wine industry, because there's always something to learn, right? I mean, it's endless.
That's why when people ask me what I like about writing about wine, that's what I tell them, is that I'll never learn everything there is to know. I'll never taste every wine in the world. I won't even come close.
No,
and so right. I really don't anticipate getting bored.
Yeah, no, you can't get bored. Particularly, I taste on Tuesdays, and starting at 9 o'clock, I finish at 2, and I have no idea what's coming in that door.
Interesting.
From flavored junk to incredibly high valued stuff for $5. I mean, really, just the gamut's unbelievable. And because wine is agricultural, it ebbs and flows. There's good and there's bad, and I mean, that's what's so interesting about it. And I was not a wine person. When I bought this from my father in 1988, it was business for me at that point. We were a business, and wine was a passionate subject. Now it's about the wine. Sort of neglecting the business, actually, a little bit. No kidding. So we want to go back to the Psalm to Vincent Morrow, because this is an important subject currently on the docket for the wine industry, and that is people of color, the barriers. And so I've had Kim Lewis, who makes wine in New Orleans. I had the young lady at the Psalm in San Francisco. I forgot the name of the restaurant. Well respected. I had another woman on, Nia Ruth. She's an influencer, a young black girl. And so what I've been trying to understand is these barriers because of the influence of wine? In other words, the ambiance of wine, it's a stuffy, old school product that has a certain connotation. Is that the barrier, or was there real racism in the industry early on? And one of the comments that was made to me by one of the women was, I said, "What do you think happened in 1960s and the 50s when Louis Martini came, when Mike Gergich came from Croatia, when Brother Timothy and the Christian Brothers, when those guys had formed the Napa Valley Vintners Association, were they resistant to change, or did they meet the same sort of racism, or that's a little strong on the word, but just resistance to foreigners being in the industry?"
I mean, a lot of them were immigrants, right?
Right, they all were.
I would hope that they weren't racist or resistant. I think a lot of those guys that you just mentioned were really pushing change in the industry. So I don't know, but I also don't know if race was a big thing that they were even thinking about.
Probably not, right?
Yeah, and I'm sure there wasn't a ton of racial diversity in Napa back then either.
No,
but, there's a lot of Italians. Yes, yeah. Exactly. So, yeah, I think there's probably a lot of different factors that have contributed to it, but I think that we've put wine on this pedestal. There's some elitism to it, and it really does. I think it can really turn off a wide segment of the population by the terms we use to talk about it. Just this stuffiness. We applied the barrier to entry cost-wise, whether you want to get into Napa wines because it's the closest wine region to you. Sure. If you want to become a somm, I mean, the cost of those tests as you go up, it's in the thousands, and buying the wines to taste to succeed on those tests, can really add up. And, there's a classist divide, I think.
I would agree with that. It is, it's not as expensive as skiing, but it's expensive to get into, particularly if you want to do things like play with Burgundy or something. But it'd be interesting to go back if we could. And maybe there's some tomes on it. I'm going to do that myself and see what the prevailing thought processes were for those guys. I know that, for instance, Jim Barrett in 1972, they weren't looking at the wine industry as an industry. They were looking at it as a tax dodge.
It was that, yes, he's said that before. But for a lot of them that I've talked to that are still around, they've literally said it was just our business. It was how we made a living. Right. It was honestly life or death, day to day, and just surviving. And this is just like any other farmer. Right. It's just, a farmer. This is our crop. And there are challenges, and maybe someone like Mondavi was a little more visionary, but I think most of them were just trying to make a living and never imagined Napa would be what it is today.
That's probably valid. In fact, I was telling you about Joanne Dupuis, who sat in this same room with you as you are, and she told me this story, and she was the first woman to ever address the Napa Valley Vintners Association. And she tells the story, and she says, "Oh, yeah, and Brother Timothy came up to me afterwards, good job." I go, "Wait a minute, you mean Brother Timothy, like Christian Brother Timothy?" And she's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Wow." So she says, that was pretty monumental back then for a woman to address the group. Didn't sound like this was sexism, that they were trying to keep them out. It just happened, and she ended up being a very successful wine tour guide, and in fact was sitting with Alexis Lachine and Andrei Telechev when the news came out about the Judgment of Paris. I mean, that's pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah, and I don't think even then they knew what impact that would have. No,
they didn't. Well, it'll be interesting to see how this peels back, because even on this trip up here, I have 3 podcasts to do. They're all 3 of them are women, and they're
great.
they're all in the business. And there are 2 or 3 more that I just couldn't get to. We do like to have some downtime when we're up here, and I think that's changing radically. And I did the Barrett sisters not too long ago, as far as this podcast is concerned, and it was fascinating conversation as well. And I think it's, again, I hate to say it this way, but I think it's sort of like it's just that ambiance of this industry has kept people from venturing into it. And I had a young intern this year during the summer, and she was fascinated by the guests on the show, and she did my talking points, and she's now applying to Davis and Fresno to go to wine school.
Yeah. I think I think there's a lot of women in wine now. I don't think, obviously, I'm sure it's still unequal, but I'm constantly getting pitched on articles on female winemakers.
Yeah, right.
And I'm kind of at the point of like, can we just call them winemakers?
Yes.
Why do we
Good
have
point.
to keep saying they're female winemakers? Of course, I want to lift those voices up in this industry and write about them and look for those opportunities, but I don't need to do it under the guise of like, here are 10 women winemakers you need to know.
Yeah.
I just want to
There's been a lot of those
talk
articles.
about really amazing the work that they're doing in the industry, and they just happen to be women, and give them space to talk about that. But I'm kind of over that.
I think that's right.
And I think the racial diversity is still maybe more, we need to highlight that a little more. But I know a ton of women winemakers that are amazing. And
there was I think maybe it was the first recession, 2008, or maybe early 2000s. There were 5 people in the Black Vintners Association, literally 5, and now there's about 250.
yeah,
So that's great to see.
yeah, progress is being made.
Yes.
Maybe not as quick as anyone would like.
Yeah.
And I think there's been a delayed. It took a lot, a couple years ago to really get people to sit down and think about it and put in the effort to change that and make faster progress.
The industry's a slow industry.
It's slow to everything.
It's just farming.
I did a panel last week on wine and NFTs, and
Oh, really?
you could
How
feel
was
the
that?
skepticism and resistance in the room. And it's one of those things where, hey guys, let's get on it now while the iron's hot and people are still figuring it out, and not 10 years from now.
Right.
And it's just
And you didn't get a round of applause, or you got
people
what
were,
are you talking about?
People were very interested and intrigued, but you could tell there was a lot of just I don't get it, and why would we actually do this? But that's the reputation this industry has.
And then
it's just being
FTX.
10 years behind everything.
I'm sure FTX didn't help that conversation.
Yeah, well, I had to really discuss the difference between cryptocurrency and NFTs to try to, because it's an elephant in the room, right?
And I think there's value to it in the wine side, a lot of value.
But we need to be having these discussions, now, because there is just this.
Our good friend Rudy, if the NFTs were around, then Rudy wouldn't have been around, and he got sent back to Taiwan or wherever he's from. But that's there's a lot of fake stuff, and that would prevent that. I read that you had done a book, cookbook. Mm-hmm. So it's sold out, but it was the proceeds were to go to
Restaurant workers.
How did that get there? That's what I was trying to find on the paper here. If you sold the book for whatever dollars, how did the money get to this?
Yeah, we had to kind of find a complicated way to do it legally and effectively. So we partnered with the local Napa Valley Boys and Girls Club, and they kind of were just our kind of silent partner, where all the money went through them, and then they helped us distribute the money to the restaurants.
And so what? How did that? What did the money do? Did it go into the pockets of the hospitality
It went
workers?
we had it go into the workers' pockets specifically instead of the restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the people I talked to when I was doing this had mentioned that they felt like the workers needed it more than the restaurants, because a lot of the restaurants were applying for aid and things like that. So it basically got divided up among staff members. Everyone got an equal amount. And we were able to give it all right before Christmas last year, so that it was kind of nice to have
great.
right before the holidays. And then a nice sum of money, 25% of the proceeds went towards Feed Napa Now, which is this restaurant group charity where they kind of help fund needs during COVID and earthquakes, fires, things like that. And basically the funds go to the restaurants to be able to feed the community that's in need.
It's called the Essential Napa Valley Cookbook, and it's recipes from
The top Napa Valley
top
restaurants.
restaurants.
So we have like I think 33 recipes.
Yeah. Wow.
And basically a lot of the restaurants that everyone knows and loves here, a few local favorites that maybe you haven't heard of. And yeah.
Let me guess, some Bouchon maybe.
We had
maybe Model Bakery.
We have Model Bakery. We had a hard time working with Thomas Keller's people, and in the end, that
didn't work out.
Didn't quite work out. But we have one of my favorites is the Bistro Don Giovanni Salmon, which is like a dark horse on their menu if you haven't had that. The burger from Goose and Gander. We have the beer can chicken from.
Wow. The Goose and Gander, very good.
Yeah, the beer can chicken from Bounty Hunter. And I think there's just like a lot of really good recipes in there.
So it raised $100,000.
It raised actually over $200,000. That's like the more updated thing. Yeah, we sold.
And so was it parameters of the Napa Valley that the hospitality workers got, or a particular group of?
It was the participating restaurants staff members.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
that is really special. Actually,
yeah, it was a really good fun thing to do.
It kind of leads this. So as well, first of all, before we get on the next subject, is there another version coming out? Another edition?
No. It was a lot of work.
I'm like, what?
And I knew it would be a lot of work, and it was 50 times more work than I imagined. I had a photographer that worked with me and a design team, and they were amazing and helped a ton. But everything else I pretty much did when it came to communicating with the restaurants, getting the recipes, writing the book, communicating with the Boys and Girls Club, and working the Shopify account, and hand delivering books up and down the valley. I mean, I can't even begin and like working with our shippers and sending out orders. So it was a more than full-time job. Yeah. At the time, I had a little more flexible schedule, but yeah.
Food is interesting because my mom, she did the recipes for my dad on the newsletter, and now it's a cookbook. We have 200 recipes.
Awesome.
She always told a story.
Yeah.
And that's like wine is a story, and food is a story. And this is great that you could put a story behind these recipes and make me feel like I'm experiencing the Napa Valley and a restaurant that people go to all the time.
I was shocked that no one had really done this before. Like there was not a compilation cookbook of Napa Valley recipes.
Yeah.
There's a ton of chefs here that have their own cookbooks.
Right, that's true.
But yeah, it just seemed like a no-brainer, and of course, people visit here, and they'd love to remember their time here with some of the delicious food they
Note to self:
had.
write cookbook. I'm sorry.
I mean, I'm not sure I'd recommend it because of the amount of work, but yeah, it's a great project.
My neighbor in Monrovia, his name was John Edwards, very famous food photographer, and he's got this huge kitchen. He's got this beautiful studio, but I can just that alone. I watch them. It's all day to take, one shot of ramen from, from a restaurant, or he shoots the side of the truck, so you see the Vaughn's truck and those food. That's the kind of stuff he does.
Yeah.
But what amount of work that is!
It's a lot of work. I mean, it's pretty incredible. The photographer Alexander Rubin, who's a local guy here, we did two days of photo shoots where we did one in Napa, one up Valley, and every restaurant, one by one, was scheduled like 15 minutes to come in, bring their dish, we shoot it, and they go. And considering and usually, ideally as a photographer, you have time to really get the shot. And the photos are incredible. It's some of the main compliments we get about the book is like the imagery, and he did an incredible job in such a short period of time.
That's hard.
Yeah.
The lighting.
And we weren't in a professional studio. We had two local businesses volunteer
That's phenomenal.
Their space, which had kitchens in case, some of them did need to do a little like cooking to finish their dish. And we just worked with what we had. And one of the days it was raining, so we couldn't really be outside. I mean, it was what it was, but we got it done.
This idea that you gave the money to the hospitality workers and the people that certainly COVID had a huge effect on these people, and it was sad, but we've come back to a different society with hospitality, which you and I were discussing earlier. But what's interesting to me, and I came up here in 1974 with my dad. We were looking for antiquities, and in fact, I still have many of them that I dragged down here when I was, 12 or 13 years old. And was a different world then. The Napa Valley was a different place. It was still very rural. You know, my dad stopped at Sutter Home and had White Zinfandel with Bob Trincaro, and now it's like unaffordable to live here for a hospitality worker. And I had this conversation with the tasting room manager for the Young Barrett's winery that she makes wine at. And the woman's telling me about how she went through this, low-income housing lottery, and they got the house, and it's in Santa Rosa, but she had to wait 2 years to move in, and then they had to make sure their income didn't go past a certain amount. I go, how ironic that they can't even remotely try and afford to live here. Is that an ongoing issue in Napa? And I know that the Napa Valley wine auction, which to me, I'm just going to lay it out there. Here's this pretentious auction with hundreds of thousands of dollars and maybe millions that go through their hands for exclusive vintages from handmade by certain winemakers to support the people that can't live here.
Yeah.
I don't. That's kind of weird to me.
Yeah. It's been an ongoing problem. I've been here 12 years. I've never had an easy time affording Napa. It's not just hospitality workers, it's the farm workers who are integral to our wine industry. It's people that have normal, you have a tasting room, well, that's hospitality, but even marketing people in the wine industry.
Sure, right.
It's hard for everyone, and it's only getting harder, and there are a number of factors that have contributed to that in the housing market here. But there's not a lot of land left, and there's the Ag Preserve, which protects a lot of land from getting developed into housing. And we were talking earlier, we've always had a staffing shortage here because people can't afford to live here, and then they're commuting from Sacramento and Fairfield, and some of them hour and a half, 2 hour distances. It's the same in Sonoma County, people that are working in Healdsburg, coming from Cloverdale. But it's definitely even worse now post-COVID. The housing market's worse, and there's this whole exodus of hospitality. So it's definitely,
the prices,
I think it's one of the biggest issues that's facing Napa Valley.
Is there an effort, not for the government, but is there an effort through the proprietors of the wineries to do something? Is there an effort? I mean, I noticed, you talk about the Ag Preserve, they just shut down a huge winery development from the Chinese investors.
Yep.
And so maybe these tie together.
The problem is that a lot of the development issues in Napa, these big winery developments or vineyard developments that are getting fought tooth and nail, are more about climate change issues and environmental and sustainability. Whereas, so these pockets are not going to get developed for low income housing either. So those are two parallel issues.
Interesting.
That aren't also helping each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's definitely a handful of vintners, vineyard managers leading the charge and for at least farm workers and providing housing, subsidized housing, housing them on their properties, doing stuff like that the best they can, but it's expensive and it's definitely not an industry-wide thing.
I wonder if the wineries and the farm, because they're contracted, right? They're not on payroll. Most of them.
It depends. Some wineries are you really need skilled labor up here, and in the old days, farm workers would come up here for the harvest season and then they'd be on their way somewhere else and they'd come back and you wouldn't have the same crew. The wineries up here, for the quality of wine they're making, really value workers that have been with them for decades. They know the vines inside and out. They have their rows. So they're willing to pay more to have that labor, and they're finding ways to keep them employed year round by, having farms and having different agriculture related activities that, makes it worthwhile to pay them a salary year round. So that is happening. But of course, for a lot of larger companies, they contract out. Some of them are H2A workers. There's a lot. I've been covering farm workers quite a bit this year, and it's complicated, and there's a lot of issues there as well.
I'm working on some scripts for kind of like a Parts Unknown show. And instead of food being the crux of the change in the conversation, it's going to be wine and food. The pilot is about the 4 wineries that were stolen during the war in Azerbaijan in the Armenian War, just as, human interest. But one of the stories I want to tell is this one. Would I run into resistance trying to not expose it, or exposing it, people know about it, but have that conversation on camera on a show?
Yes. The hardest part is actually getting farm workers to talk. There's obviously often a language barrier.
Right,
They're
right.
uncomfortable. I've been working with some industry groups to help me connect with farm workers throughout my reporting. But a lot of them are also just scared to put themselves out there. They're afraid they're going to get fired, not get hired based on speaking out about things. The big issue I've been covering this year is in Sonoma County, and it's a fight for better working conditions during fire season, because a lot of them have been sent into evacuation zones to harvest fruit in the middle of harvest. It's crucial to get those grapes off the vine, but it's putting workers at risk. They're inhaling the smoke, and they don't feel like they can say no, because they live for every paycheck, and they're afraid that they'll get fired or they'll lose their job. And also just missing work during the fire period is a big issue, because they won't get paid. So they've been fighting for like disaster insurance and hazard pay and things like that. And they've made some good headway, but it's definitely like a statewide issue, I think. And Sonoma County has kind of been the hub of that fight.
With the cost of real estate in the Napa Valley and the just wine alone, I was coming up here just before COVID, and I was having a conversation with Sarah Clearman from the Register, I think. She's the wine beat writer. She was anyway. But her conversation was more about like what's going to happen to these wineries that don't have an e-commerce, robust e-commerce page, and what's going to happen during COVID. And that's already panned out, and whatever happened. But it seems that Napa is basically pricing itself out of the world. I mean, when you pay $10,000 a ton for grapes, which means you got to have the minimum you can charge for a bottle of wine is $100. How many buyers are like that?
It's a conversation we've been having all year. I've written several articles about this. There's another one pretty much on exactly what you just said coming out from my colleague Esther by the end of the year. So keep an eye out for that. I don't know when this podcast will air, but it's funny because the demand is here. People are still coming here. People are buying wine. Wine sales are up for a lot of wineries. They might have less visitors, but visitors are spending more money. The Bay Area is obviously like a pretty good hub for wealthy people to come from. We still get a lot of people from Texas and different,
amazing
wealthier areas. So I think a lot of the industry is currently of the thought of it's working for us. And frankly, it's hard to find a solution like to lower prices at this point.
I don't know
when the cost of grapes and cost of production is up, and their cost of materials has skyrocketed. Insurance has skyrocketed because of fires. There's so many extra costs that I really do feel for them, and I understand where they're coming from. And it's like, how could we not raise prices and keep this train rolling? I think luckily that demand is there, but I'm not convinced it's going to stay there. And I think there has to be a ceiling to this,
so
you can't go more.
I bottled some wine from Dunnigan Hills, really good blend, and I said I want a screw cap. I mean, I wanted a straight shank cork, and he goes, and then the wine came, it was in a screw cap, and I said I ordered a straight shank. He goes, can't get it. That was about probably a year ago. So the supply chain, and besides the $6.30 I paid for a case of bottles with the cardboard and the inner staves, I paid $14.
Yeah.
So I understand that. Just the morale that shoots.
Shipping is a huge thing too,
Shipping's
and getting
double.
barrels. The cost of getting these containers is like, I mean, people told me they went from like $3,000 a container to like $14,000 a container this year. Yeah. So it's reality, and it's a struggle. And I think for now the industry's lucky that people are still buying wine. I just don't know, especially with a recession coming. Everyone says fine wine's recession proof, but we're also starting to see some reports come out that this might be a little different this time around, and we're not so sure. And people should be ready for some impact.
It's an interesting problem. Wink. Here's the irony of that, right? I have my customer base is really $15. That's what I sell, and if I'm on sale, they're like $7. And I can have 50 people at a tasting like last Saturday, and they'll spend $3,000-4,000 before the day's over. And I've had 5 people on staff to do that, and it's a lot of work. 2 days before, I had a private party for 6 people. They spent $5,000 in 45 minutes because they bought the Silver Oaks and the Camises and the Leonardini Whitehall Lane stuff, and even some other premium French. And then Wink goes out of business, which was always in that, really that 7. Their initial deal $6, and then you pay like $12 to $14. And they were doing like $80 million in sales, and they could never turn a profit. So there's like 2 completely different models that if the fine wine starts to falter a little bit because of the prices, but what about these guys that faltered? They're in a different marketplace. And I think maybe wine consumption's changed. The millennials don't drink as much.
And they're drinking other things.
They're drinking White Claw.
And they're drinking non-alcohol and low alcohol, and there's a lot of competition. And I think millennials, as a millennial, I'm an older, probably, or mid-millennial, I don't know what you would call me, but, they really like discovery. It's like new things. So it's not about just drinking the same high-quality stuff.
Somebody out there?
Yeah. Every day. But, it's just like, I want to try something new, and what's new and what's hot and what's trending. And so that the millennial generation and younger consumers is another big topic of discussion in the industry. How do we get them to get into wine and continue to buy wine at these prices? Because
I have 3 millennials.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I turned them on to champagne.
Yeah.
That's costing me.
I'm also turned on to champagne. Yeah.
But I prefer that than White Claw.
Yes.
This other stuff. It's been such a pleasure having you here. And we have so much to talk about.
I know. We could talk for 2 days probably.
Bounced around a little bit, but I look forward to doing it again. We come up here quite frequently, and I prefer to do it in person if I can. So maybe we get Esther in here. We do a 3-way thing and have some fun with bouncing off opinions about what we're doing. But thanks again. Thanks for coming. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers.